and those that are online, thank you for watching me and taking your time. I expect that this will help you to understand reframing disability, embracing the deaf perspectives through a fresh lens. First, I would like to share a few things with you. Let me introduce myself. Hold on a second. Okay, okay, perfect. Technology, okay. So I work here at Moraine Valley in Building B. Some of you may have seen me in the hallway or just passing by. I work in the ASL Lab Center. I do some assistance and I help the instructors if they need help with the rooms and the students as well. We have some one-on-ones with scheduling, different situations. I'm here for whatever you need, and that's basically for the staff as well. I have been married for a few years. My husband is also deaf. I have a baby boy. See him right there. Isn't he cute? And that's a little simple information about myself. There are going to be 5 aspects to deaf culture. And I will give you some information to make you knowledgeable. First, language, American Sign Language. That is our most popular language, American Sign Language. Hold on a second. Second is our values. We value our language because it assists us with communicating our experiences, sharing stories that are involved in our community, things that we were not aware of. We learn something new from each other. We also have name signs, and there are reasons behind the name signs why they're created. And mine is A on the chest for Amy. We're very blunt, very direct. We express ourselves through signing and art. We have legacies that we pass on for generations. Here's one example. This is short. First, all people have stories. Deaf people have stories. And the sign for marriage, Mary, 2 hands together. Okay? I'm going to have the interpreter to turn her voice off, and then I'm going to sign, and maybe you will catch what I said. And if not, then I will have the interpreter to voice what I'm signing. Okay, turn your voice off, Barb. Okay. I just want to make sure that you all understand. So basically, we're talking about King Kong that was traveling through the community trying to find someone to capture. So he did find someone and he had her in his hands. Remember, he's humongous, and this person that he captured is very, very tiny. And of course, she was terrified. She couldn't run away from him. And he's saying, "Oh, don't be afraid. You are so beautiful. I won't hurt you. I'm going to marry you." And he crushed her in his hands, and she passed away. That's our deaf humor. And that's one of our stories. We have many, many stories, and that has passed down through the years. That's just one I wanted you all to know about. I could give you a whole list of them, but that's one. Traditions. We have stories that we pass down, and stories that are passed down for generations, and it's very important that we are inclusive. Uh, we had Deaf Club where we would go to have games and get the latest news. This was a long time ago. So now that technology is involved, we no longer have to go to the Deaf Club. We can catch up through technology and get the latest news. We can also get assistance through the technology as well. And then we have our norms, our standards, things, the importance of, like looking each other in the eye, paying attention to what is being said. You can't look away. You have to look each other in the eyes as you communicate. And how do you get our attention? Tap us on the shoulders or, you know, uh, turn the light switch on and off to get our attention, to get the attention of someone across the room, or wave your hands. It depends on where you are. Like if you're in the kitchen, uh, and there are various people in the kitchens, and somebody wants to give a recipe, or maybe somebody wants a drink or something, we all sit around at the kitchen table, eat, and communicate. Our identity. We share our identity with our culture. We are proud of being deaf. That is our identity, and it is very important to us. And that is something that is handed down for generations. All of those 5 aspects are included, and we cherish them. We really value them. I will share a lot of information with you through our history, and some of the information will overlap. There are a lot of positive things, and there are timelines. I'm not sure of the various timelines, so some of the information may overlap. Just letting you know that ahead of time. But generally, okay, it's the historical content, how things were before, how deaf people were treated, how they were looked at, the changing attitudes, empowerment and inclusion. The changing attitudes, what the attitudes were toward deaf people way back when and all the way up until today. Some changes that have occurred over time. And more inclusive now, and empowerment. Empowerment and inclusion. And it's really important that we have discussions and access and inclusive, especially when it comes to education and training and the impact of the law. For example, the American with Disabilities Act. I will expand on that later and talk to you more in depth about that. And then the positive examples that we have, the initiatives, support, the challenges. I will show you different examples of the successes that we've had. And I'll give you a little bit of narrative about that, about the empowerment and the positive examples that we've had. And finally, we'll talk about the challenges and opportunities. And I know that there are still challenges, for example, access, barriers to access, the need for continuing support, advocacy, and being included, equal access in the community. Okay, and now I'm going to start my presentation. I'm going to start at 355 BC. And you're like, 355 BC? Why? That's so long ago. You'll see. Aristotle. He's a very well-known Greek philosopher and polymath. But really, those who are born deaf, they all become senseless. You can't teach them anything. They cannot learn. They can't reason. But that was a long time ago. So deaf people were swept to the side. They were ignored.
Often, historically, they would put people in mental institutions, or they would be put away in a basement or behind closed doors within the family's home. So no one would actually know that this deaf person existed. It was important for people to not let that news be out in the community. Deaf and dumb was a term that was used, as well as deaf mute. Those were used previously, but later, as years went on, those terms were changed to hearing impaired, which is still a negative term. It is frowned upon. It looks at someone as that there's something broken that they need to be fixed. That they don't fit in with the world at large. They can't fit in the hearing world. That's where the word impairment comes across in a negative way. So today, the proper terms are deaf or hard of hearing, deaf and hard of hearing, deaf or hard of hearing, or just deaf hard of hearing, DHH. You'll also see deaf blind. So they are also part of the deaf world. So deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind. And that shows self-esteem, pride in their identity. They don't have to feel that they need to shy away from their deafness. They can be proud of it. So that's why people prefer now to be called deaf or hard of hearing. jumping ahead on the timeline to 1760. Sorry, I mean, I don't speak French, so I feel bad for the interpreters having to pronounce these these names. I guess that's one of the benefits of being deaf, is that you don't have to worry about mispronouncing something. So Charles Michel de la Paix founded this school in Paris, France. I mean, and you may wonder how there is a connection between France and here in the United States, and we will get to that later. These people were next door neighbors. This in the year 1814. Thomas Gallaudet noticed that this young girl, Alice, was outside playing by herself. All the kids were off playing together, but she was isolated on her own. And he found out eventually that she was deaf, so he approached her, and they used a stick to write in the sand and the dirt to communicate. So he got different items, for example, a ball, and he wrote out the word ball to teach her the connection between the word and the item. And then he wrote out her name, Alice, in the sand and pointed to her. And she knew that that word referred to her. Her father saw this and was incredibly impressed and asked Thomas Gallaudet if he would continue working with his daughter Alice through the summer. Time went on, and at that time there was no school for her. They were just working on a one-on-one basis and trying their best for Thomas to teach Alice and make some progress. Now, in 1815, Laurent Clerc, now Cogswell and Laurent Clerc, I'm sorry, not Cogswell, it was Gallaudet and Laurent Clerc. Their father, Alice Cogswell's father, sent them overseas to France because he knew that they were working there to teach deaf children. And that was at the school that I had mentioned previously. So Laurent Clerc worked at this school teaching deaf children. And so he wanted to go and learn how these methods were being used. Thomas Gallaudet invited Laurent Clerc to come with him to America. And while they were traveling back across the sea, they were learning from each other. And when they arrived here in the United States that was in 1816 that they were traveling. And then in 1817, they formed the Hartford Asylum for the Education and Instruction of the Deaf and Dumb. That school was founded in Connecticut, and it still is in existence today. However, the name has been changed, and now it is called the American School for the Deaf. It has been in operation for over 200 years now, still going strong. Edward Minor Gallaudet was the son of Thomas Gallaudet. He established the National Deaf Mute College in Washington, D.C. under the support of Abraham Lincoln, who approved of what he was doing. In 1890, that was in 1864, and in 1894, the National Deaf Mute College was renamed Gallaudet in honor of Thomas H. Gallaudet. Now, Gallaudet is called Gallaudet University, and it is the world's only liberal arts university for deaf and hard of hearing students in the entire world. After all of these years, there are other colleges that have programs within a larger university settings intended for the deaf, but no other schools are exclusively for deaf and hard of hearing students. Still to this day, it's the only one. We do have one of our instructors here. I'm not going to tell you who, but that person graduated from Gallaudet University. Okay, now this is going to get a little interesting. You probably are all familiar with Alexander Graham Bell, right? Or AGB for short. Let me back up a little bit. He invented the telephone. As you're probably aware, he was a scientist, an inventor. That's what he's more well known for. But in the deaf community, he founded a school using oralism. He had a strong belief that deaf people should be taught speech and lip reading. And they should not be taught sign language at all. It was forbidden. That is what Bell believed. Ironically, his mother was deaf and his wife was deaf. His wife did not sign at all. She didn't want people to know, or Alexander Graham Bell didn't sign at all because he didn't want people to know that his mother and his wife were deaf. And he also tried to forbid people who were deaf from marrying other deaf people. He tried to actually legally block that. It didn't work. Yep, people who are deaf still get married. Terry's married to a deaf man. Deaf people can marry people who can hear as well, so that's fine. But we are permitted to get married regardless of hearing or deaf status. But Alexander Graham Bell did not want to see deaf people marry each other because he didn't want to see them have more deaf babies and continue to expand the deaf community. It was unsuccessful. Not to mention the fact that most deaf people are not born to deaf parents. Me, for example, my whole family has typical hearing. I am the only deaf person in my family. I know many other people who come from large deaf generational families, but it's only about 10% of deaf individuals come from predominantly deaf families. The Milan Conference the intent of this conference was to pass some laws that deaf people could not use sign language. They would have to go to school to learn how to speak. That was the goal of this conference. Unfortunately, Alexander Graham Bell was invited to present, and he spoke for 3 days while they cherry-picked people who would advocate for sign language, and they only permitted them to present for 3 hours. So this was very detrimental to the deaf community, very damaging. Let me back up for just a moment. The reason that it was detrimental to the deaf community is because it created a traumatic experience for deaf people who are just trying to be forced to be oral. They would hit them on their hands with a ruler if they tried to use sign language. They would force them to sit on their hands so they couldn't sign. It was really quite traumatic in so many different ways. However, the hearing people could prevent deaf people from signing. It caused a lot of damage and trauma for people at that time. Now, the National Association of the Deaf, or NAD, was founded after this Milan conference. They really wanted to have their voice heard at the federal level. So NAD was founded, and they were trying to make some breakthroughs for the deaf community. In the year 1907, the state of Indiana passed the first law to sterilize deaf people. I mean, that goes back to Alexander Graham Bell's theories about deaf people not being permitted to marry one another. So they would actually sterilize people to prevent that. And that became a model for other states. California, unfortunately, became a model for Nazi Germany. William Stokey published a research proving that American Sign Language is a legitimate language. He had documentation and proof that it met all these criteria. So oralism was still predominant at the time, but he attempted to show that people who use sign language could still develop normally. They didn't have to be confined to using just the oral method. He is considered the father of sign language, of linguistics. Then in the year 1964, RID, or the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, was founded. This organization provides continuing education for interpreters and promotes standards to ensure that interpreters are qualified. So it's not necessarily required by law to follow all of these things, but in order to become certified, you have to take their test and screen to prove your qualifications in sign language interpreting. Captioning first began in the year 1972, and the first program with captions was The French Chef on PBS. Prior to that, deaf people could watch TV, but they wouldn't really have access to what people were saying. They would just see people moving their mouths and gesticulating. They might know that somebody's mad from how they were moving around, but they didn't know why. So typically, deaf people would watch cartoons. Sometimes there's no dialogue. It's all just action, like Tom and Jerry, or like you see them acting out different scenes, or like Coyote and Roadrunner is another one. You see the chase and the coyote falling off the cliff, so you can understand that even without any words.
All they were able to do was just watch. They weren't really involved with what was going on. Then in 1973, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This really was a law that required the recruitment of bringing in deaf or hiring deaf people to help them to be successful. This was assisting them in communications. They set up access to the development It was a long, slow process, but it continued on. 1975, the Education of Handicapped Children Act. It changed in 1990 to the EHCA. It was changed to IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Hold that thought for a minute, 1990. Okay, let me say this again. I made a mistake. Hold on a second. I made a mistake. Okay, let me go back. The word changed. Today, this is the deaf president now. There was a strike at Gallaudet University in 1988. Gallaudet hired a hearing person that was horrible in sign language. That person knew absolutely nothing about the needs of deaf people, but they chose him. They chose this female. Why was that? They chose her over him. Why not him? Oh my God. They rebelled, and that continued on. There was 5 days of rebellion, and she stepped down. They then chose I. King Jordan. He was chosen. He was the first deaf president of Gallaudet University. Remember, Gallaudet was started a long time ago. It was established a long time ago. And now this is 1988, and they finally hired the first deaf president. This is a picture of I. King Jordan. It was world news, and many countries were looking at this event. Wow, a deaf president, finally. And deaf people rebelled in order to get that deaf president. That increased the self-esteem of everyone. It was very prideful for the deaf community. They felt great about that, someone just like them. And then next, 1990, the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act. There is a long list of disabilities, but specifically for the deaf people, qualified interpreters. They have a right to require that. Whether it's employment, like the 2 interpreters that are voicing for me as I do my presentation, there are a whole list of requirements. Qualified interpreters. This is our communication access. In 2007, here in the state of Illinois, the interpreter law is what we call, it has more teeth to it. It explains what qualified really is. For example, here's the ADA, but it doesn't really say qualified. So I could get my mom to come and interpret for me. Is she qualified? Really? Well, just imagine, I'm a 13-year-old kid and interpreting for a pap smear. I mean, really personal stuff, come on. And then they say, this is your mom, and she has cancer. And the daughter, this is my baby, and she has to interpret that at 13? Come on, what do you think? police officer comes to the house, a 6-year-old son, and he's saying, tell your mom this. And my son is 6. And I'm sorry to inform you, your son passed away in a car accident. Oh my God. So that situation is a burden on a kid. Or it could be on the mom or cousin, or we have to move them aside and have a qualified interpreter who would be neutral. Someone who has to take the test, they would have to go to RID, Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, or they can go to the state, and the state will give them a test, and they will observe their skill level. You're level 3, level 2, and that is neutral. And they will specify the situation that interpreter is qualified for. So we can call on interpreters to come in and explain. Now interpreters are neutral. And now 2020, first COVID came. And naturally, we in the deaf community are concerned. We want to know what's going to happen. What do we do? There are so many things that we're concerned about and we're looking for. And I have to say, captioning is not 100%. It does help a little bit. We have to figure out what they're saying. But you never know with captioning, on the news. So here we had interpreters standing next to the governor as they're expressing what is going on in COVID. So our language is not really a written language. We use hands to communicate, and we now understand what is going on within the world. We can follow and be kept updated on the news. And also, to add to that, we now have certified deaf individuals. They're called CDIs. It's really their language, which means that we have a hearing interpreter there, and she will sign and feed the certified deaf interpreter. And then the certified deaf interpreter will sign or will communicate with me, and really it is their language, so I'm able to really clearly understand what is going on. It is a big boost for our community since we have that now. What are the attitudes? They used to mock us, shame us, tease us, keep us hidden in the room, locked behind locked doors, making fun of us. Like one kid would look and then just start making up signs with her hands, trying to be funny. Oh, I know sign language. Watch, watch, watch. And really, there's gibberish, not signing anything, not really. And maybe trying to tease. It's not funny. Just something that I think you all should need to know in comparison. Like some tease and make fun, but it's not cool. It is not funny. Like some people don't like to be made fun of. Maybe you don't like your race to be made fun of. Well, deaf people feel the same way. We don't want to be made ashamed of. Some people have no clue but there's not enough knowledge in reference to the deaf community, but we're trying to spread the knowledge. But it has improved. There was a TV show, Switched at Birth. Wow. The majority of them were deaf. The majority of the characters were deaf. There was different cultures included. It was really phenomenal. And maybe it has some things going on behind the scenes. Maybe they had deaf people that were signing and teaching them. But it really opened up a lot of doors. And the hearing people were really fascinated with that show. And they said, I want to learn sign language. And now the sign language programs have expanded nationwide. And some people just want to learn it as a language, as a second language. And some people want to become interpreters or instructors, work at the deaf school, at the residential school, or work in mainstream. It has really expanded. The knowledge has expanded. There was a lot of oppression. I'll share one of my stories with you, my experience where I was oppressed. I was driving to drop my friend off at work. A police pulled me over. I said, okay, I guess I was speeding a little bit. Okay, fine. I'll accept that. I'm not going to argue about it. So I pulled over, and my friend I had already dropped her off at work. So the secretary immediately saw the cop pull me over and started, and he was fussing at me, and I didn't care about the ticket, but why was he talking to me like that? I mean, he didn't even talk to me. He kept talking to her. She was not involved. So what was that? I was fuming. I was burning up. To me, my situation was a little unique because my father worked as a mechanic in the town, and he knew a lot of police officers because he used to work on their cars. So I went straight to my dad and I said, okay, Dad. I told him I asked him, how can I find out who this cop was? And so my dad said, well, there's a cop over there. And I said, who was that cop? Who's the boss? He told me the boss's name. And it was a lieutenant. So I said, okay, thank you. I went home and I made a call. I called the office. I got the correct number. And when I called, I said, I want an appointment with the boss. Understand that I am deaf and I'm going to need an interpreter for this meeting. So, the ADA was still new. It was maybe in the around 98, 99, somewhere around there. So, kind of shaky situation. So I said, I need a sign language interpreter, and you need to call this agency and reserve an interpreter for the appointment. So the day of the appointment came, I arrived, and no interpreter. And he's pointing at different people, and I'm saying, no, hold on. It is your responsibility to provide the interpreter, according to the ADA. And he's saying, no, you, and I'm saying, and he's saying, what do you want? Trying to rush me, and I'm upset, and my gut instinct says this is going to go nowhere. So I said, okay, I'm going to make you suffer a little bit. So I got a paper and pen, and I kept writing, flipping page after page. I had time. I wasn't worried, and I kept on writing word for word, every word specifically for what happened. I wrote everything in order. And plus, English is not my first language, okay? It's not my grammar, but it was clear. He understood everything that I wrote.
So they brought in the cop that had pulled me over, and I just continued to write and write and write. I maybe sat there, wrote about 10 pages long of a report. Maybe it took me a half an hour. I didn't care how long it took. With an interpreter, we would have been done with this in a matter of minutes. But fine, I'm going to write my story. And so I finally handed this manuscript over to the lieutenant. And basically what he did, now again, this is a lieutenant. He flipped through the pages in a cursory manner and said, okay, thumbs up. Well, I'll talk to him. Okay, come on. Really? So again, I am fuming. I left. I went back to my dad. It was shortly, my dad's shop was not far from there. I said, Dad, okay, this isn't going anywhere. Basically, it went in one ear and out the other. And so I went above that person's head. I said, excuse me, Captain, who was the highest ranking member of the police force. I went home. I made a phone call to the office. I said, I like to make an appointment. I'll need a sign language interpreter. Please reserve one for me. And I absolutely must have a sign language interpreter. And they said, okay, we'll work it all out. A week later, I went in for my appointment, and there was a man sitting in a vest and in a suit. I mean, I'm from a small town. I mean, it's still in the Chicago area, but I'm from Peoria. So I knew a lot of the interpreters from that area. And I thought, well, who is this man? I'm not sure who he is. Like, okay, well, he started using very minimal, unqualified sign language. And I thought, okay, they said that they're an interpreter here to help. I said, but you're not certified. Well, this person is a CODA, or a child of deaf adults, meaning that one or both of this man's parents were deaf. Okay, so, I mean, I just wanted to get this situation over and done with. So I said, okay, we'll see how this goes. We might need to reschedule if this doesn't work out with this person presenting themselves as an interpreter. But I said, okay. So I started to go through for 5 minutes, just explaining everything that had happened. And he said, okay, what, are you mad about the ticket? And I said, no, I'm not mad about the ticket. I accept my fault for that. I mean, that part, we can figure that out later. I'm talking about this, the fact that the officer who pulled me over didn't speak with me at all. So it was a sensitivity training issue. I talked with them, and I was relieved after having shared my story. And about 3 months or 4 months later, my father, who was aware of the whole story from A to Z, he was just as mad. So they finally made a connection with my dad's name, and it got back to them that my dad was upset about this. And so finally, my dad said, listen, I didn't have anything to do with that situation. It was all between my daughter, and she wants to find out who is responsible here. They want to make this clear, and that she will not be discriminated against. So all my dad did was find out who it was and pass on that name to me. So he was not involved at all. So the lieutenant said, no, 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 no. We are going to have a sensitivity training. And just so you're aware, your daughter is brilliant. And we're very impressed with her for somebody with a disability. Like, come on. I don't know what kind of comment that was intended to be, but clearly they realized that there was something serious going on, and they didn't even imagine what it must have been like for me in this situation. But again, this happened in the 1990s. Still, people had these kind of attitudes and these traumatic things, and these labels and stereotypes were still happening at that time. So that is kind of my personal story of oppression. It just takes a lot of my time to really be able to raise awareness, explain things, to provide advocacy, not just for myself, but for my community, my friends, my family. Our last few minutes together will be talking about technology, and it'll soon be time to wrap up. Technology has continued to improve through the years. Prior to technology, people had to gather in person, and until the TTY, the teletypewriter, was invented. That was a device that hooked up with a landline phone, and someone on one TTY, and again, this was a very large unit, like the size of the podium. You had to type out your phone conversation on this clunky big machine. As time went on, the size of the TTYs got smaller. Eventually, texting became a much simpler, faster way. It was like a computer in your phone. It was very fancy for the time. We never had that before. Terry may have had or somebody may have had a Wintel. If you both had one, then you could communicate directly with each other through a small alphanumeric pager. This was a great way for deaf people to communicate with their deaf friends. And now we have mobile phones. Things have really, really progressed since then. We have two different ways to use video calling. A direct call, a deaf person calling another deaf person, so they can use sign language on their video phone and communicate directly. It's kind of like FaceTime, similar concept. So that's one way to use video technology. There's also a video interpreter. Instead of me saying, hey mom, would you mind interpreting a phone call for me? Or my sister, would you make this phone call to my teacher, my boss on my behalf? I don't have to do that anymore. I am able to call and get an interpreter. And I call to the service and say, I need to call this person, here's their phone number, and that interpreter will route through to the person I want to call and facilitate the communication. So I don't have to rely on my family or my own personal contacts to manage my phone calls for me. Now, you remember the Milan conference back in the 1880s? Actually, they wrote a formal apology letter about what had happened in 1880. I mean, we're talking over, about 130 years later? But see how long it takes for things to start changing and those incremental little improvements. It's a long, hard struggle to raise awareness and to continue to fight for our rights and other things that are important to the deaf community. Captions have become standard for all television materials. Now we are more able to be included in an equitable way alongside hearing people to know what's going on hot news or anything else on the TV. So that's been very nice. In bars, hearing people are able to also benefit from the captions. Maybe you're at a sports bar and people are talking loudly, but you can still read the captions on the TV and follow along with what's going on the screen. Whether it's the sports team or they break in with a breaking news story. So that's very nice. And so that's all that I have in my presentation. In summary, so I hope that this has helped you to embrace the deaf perspective through a fresh lens. We can celebrate the uniqueness, the strength of the deaf community, and foster more inclusion, greater respect, and unity in society. You can now imagine things from our culture, our history, and how things have changed through time, and how you can better make things more accessible and advocate on our behalf, become our allies in dealing with these things. So I just want to thank you again. Thank you. I know I'm kind of keeping an eye on the clock here, but I want to say how much I appreciate you all being here. Now, if anyone, we have some time for some questions and answers, if we're good. Okay, I'll open it up at this point.
Yes, and I have a microphone. Yeah, go ahead.
If there's anyone in the audience, we'll have one of the interpreters up front, so it's accessible for everyone. No questions?
Have you ever attended a music concert or a dance concert?
No, I really don't have interest in that kind of thing. That's just my own personal opinion. I have some deaf individuals who enjoy going to the theater and concerts. Some deaf people do have access with hearing aids, or they're quote unquote very hard of hearing, so they are still able to participate in musical events. But for me, I'm not really interested. And Terry agrees that it's not really something that's of interest for her either.
I'd like to add something. Hello, everybody. Very often, people who can hear look at the person who is deaf. Oh my God, you can't hear. Oh my God, I cannot imagine how I would be able to live life without music. I can't live without music. But that's the attitude of people who can hear. But in the deaf community, we don't feel like, oh my God, I miss anything. We don't miss anything. But yes, there are many deaf or hard of hearing who do enjoy music. But the two of us, we don't care. I mean, there are other things that we enjoy.
The reason I ask that, because I do teach here at Moraine. And I assign a concert report. It's one of the tasks, assignments for class. And over the years, I have had a few deaf people in my class. And I have given them options. You know, Moraine Valley does have a fine and performing arts center, and we do have music concerts, and we have dance concerts. they could either attend something like that, or there are papers that they could write. You know, there are musicians who are actually deaf who are able to perform music. I just want to open their world to it. And
Sure.
it was something they never thought of. It was something that was never offered them in the deaf community. And I literally have met students at the Fine Arts Center and attended a concert with them because no one has ever taken them to experience music, and especially dance concerts. And there was one gentleman, he was 28 years old, and I met him at the Fine Arts Center, and I had him sit close enough so he could feel the vibration. So I think people don't realize that we feel the vibration of music. So we went to, it was a story ballet. So we read up on the story so he could see how they were telling story through movement. And we sat close enough so he could feel the vibration of the musicians playing in the orchestra pit. And we watched the story. He said it was such a wonderful experience that no one ever thought that he could experience something or enjoy that, or that was ever for him.
Okay, yeah. I have gone here to the Ben Vereen show. So I did attend that. I mean, obviously I didn't know the music, but I had seen him in movies before. So I was excited about maybe I could meet a celebrity. But so I did enjoy myself at that event. But I mean, the music and the songs that he performed as part of the show, I mean, I guess they were okay. It wasn't a particularly enjoyable part of the night for me, but I still, I did get to meet him. So that was a very cool experience for me when he was here. Just don't stop trying. There are other staff here. Gretchen, who I work with, she just loves theater and performance. So maybe you would want to speak with her and see how she works with me in the ASL lab, so you might want to touch base with her and see how things might be improved for deaf audience members. And just make it more worth it for us to attend these kind of events. Okay.
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much. The information you presented was incredibly helpful and thoughtful, so thank you for that. I teach an introduction to social work class.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And a couple of my students are interested in the advocacy and policy part of social work, so not necessarily working directly with individuals or communities. What would you say? You presented a little bit about the change in policy and law and how long it took for these laws to get passed and be supportive of the deaf community. If there's still a gap in policy, what would you say the gap is for students who may be interested in supporting this population?
Really, it's a matter of awareness. Working closely with some of the organizations and agencies, for example, Chicago Hearing Society, they may want to work alongside them and become familiar with what they do, see what their policies and procedures look like, and so they can see what those things might look like in terms of the deaf community and the different considerations, some problems that there may be, and where there still needs to be some things worked out and figured out. Getting involved with deaf organizations, maybe Terry has some other ideas of things to add.
So we have a lawyer that does the ADA and the licensing law requirements, the agencies, the schools, they provide interpreters, but still there are so many places that either are unaware or just refuse to provide interpreters. We need more advocacy and support in that area, and those like hospitals, museums, schools, encouraging them to provide interpreters. DCFS, the Department of Family and Children Services, there's a huge issue in the social worker. The social workers go to the home, find out the parents are deaf and they have a small child, and they go without an interpreter. And the interpreter wants to talk to the deaf child. How are they able to communicate with the deaf child? There is a huge issue here in Illinois. We need more support in that area to make sure that interpreters are provided in those different places. Okay, good.
Thank you for that. Any last minute questions or comments? Okay.
Okay, thank
then I
you
think
to
we're gonna
Amy,
wrap
and
up.
thank you to our interpreters. How about a round of applause?
Yay.
Thank you
Thank
all
you.
again.
Oh, hold on, I need to add
Oh.
something. Why do we do this? This is for clapping. This is deaf clap. We wave our hands in the air. That's why we do that. Okay, so for you all that are in my class this evening, you can either go to lab and do your homework,